Facebook up on Capitol Hill once again. Facebook has become a company that is a bit of a punching bag for pretty much everyone in politics now. Everyone finds something about Facebook to be upset about, and it is a very, very powerful company. I was going to say country. It really, in a sense, is its own country. It has a level of wealth that is akin to what you'd see in a lot of, probably actually wealthier than a lot of countries, now that I think about it. But Facebook look, it's an incredible story. We've all seen the social network. We all know what Facebook is. We use it. I use it. We talk about it. We pull from it for a segment of this show. It has become a part of our lives, and yet we're still figuring out what are our expectations of it. What should Facebook be required to do by the government? What should customers, which remember, you are the product. You're giving them all your information all the time. They're micro-targeting ads to you. There's a reason why when you look up, hey, I want some ostrich skin neon green boots, all of a sudden you see an ad for those ostrich skin. Ostrich skin's a thing, I think, right? Those are expensive. It's the fancy boots. Some of you probably know a lot more about cowboy boots than I do. Anyway, Mark Zuckerberg was up on Capitol Hill, and one of the indignities that he has to suffer through, which is, I suppose, not that big a deal because he's worth, I don't know how many tens of billions of dollars. He's a very, very wealthy man, and he's about my age, maybe a year or two older than me, I think. He's about my age. I am not worth tens of billions of dollars, but producer Mark and I are working hard on it right now. So we're going to get there. I just have to invent a generation-defining company that is effectively an unlimited money machine that can be scaled out globally. I think we're onto something with those history podcasts, though. I think we're going to get there. So, bunch of different things, a bunch of different avenues of attack against Facebook, which, as we know, social media platforms are going to be more potent in many ways in the next election than one that they've ever been before. More people are on them. More people are using them. Generation Z and the millennials, your Generation Z, producer Mark, Generation Z and the millennials are now an enormous voting bloc. And that means that people that have grown up, or at least have at a young age started using YouTube and Facebook and these things, are we getting oh, no, you're just doing work. I thought you were going to weigh in on behalf of Generation Z.
Well, I'm a millennial.
You're a millennial?
Yes.
Well, how much younger would you have to be Generation Z?
Much younger. I'm 26.
Yeah, but doesn't that, I don't know where.
I think like 98 or 99 is the cutoff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, fine. So he's a millennial. I mean, technically, we're both millennials, although he pretends like I'm not.
You're a much older millennial.
I know. I'm an old, fuddy-duddy millennial with creaky bones and back pain. So, Zuckerberg's on Capitol. He's getting all this beef because you're going to have all these people that are trying to, well, there's just a lot of grandstanding. It's an opportunity to be like, oh, look at me stand up to this big, powerful company. But the left got used to, for a long time, these Silicon Valley super companies, these giants of communication, digital communication, effectively operating as subsidiaries of the DNC. I mean, they were so biased in favor of Democrats in ways that we've seen some of it, but there's so much that we've never even found out, and we know we'll never find out. There are many different plausible, I would say, theories about what the real advantage was for Democrats, particularly in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, because of social media platforms. And we'll never really know. They won't submit to independent auditing. We know that they play this game where they go backwards and forwards between being a platform versus being a publisher. And we also know that the culture within these Silicon Valley companies, the culture of the San Francisco Bay Area, that part of Northern California, is the most progressive left-wing enclave in the entire United States. I mean, New York City's got some crazy stuff. You got to Brooklyn, and everyone's, a Bernie Sanders voter who's pickling their own beets and walking around in clothing that they made from sustainable, organic, salvaged cotton from fair trade. I don't know. But San Francisco Bay Area is the single greatest concentration of left-wing ideology by voter registration and also just by sheer dollar figures they can pump into the system of anywhere in the entire country. And that has, we've seen that have a very important influence or a very powerful influence on the way that Facebook and YouTube and these other companies operate. So it is with that we see Democrats and Republicans at some level, but Democrats really trying to, it seems to me, to bully Facebook at some level, to bully them and to convince them that they need to take a more active role. They liked the old way where if you wanted to run an ad for a company that sells guns, it would just mysteriously disappear, right? They liked the old way when we were all led to believe, and this was, for a long time, we were led to believe that the mainstream media was neutral and nonpartisan, and that was a big, fat lie. And we've more or less, I mean, if you still believe that, that's on you, right? If you still believe it, you're just not very savvy. You're not really paying attention. I mean, you don't believe it because you listen and watch the show, but I believes that. We also, this is more understandable because it's a newer situation. We have less information and less history to run on. But there's also the circumstance of thinking that these massive social media companies are public utilities, right? It's like the phone lines. You call whoever you want to call. Phone company doesn't care who you are. It's just something that people can use that does not take political positions. That turns out to not be true. And it's with that in mind now that we see a pushback. You've got Congressman Hawley, for example, Josh Hawley, who's trying to force these companies to adopt some rules to protect the basic idea of them as a free speech platform. And there's some movement in that direction. I say Mark Zuckerberg fortunately doesn't seem like a dogmatic leftist. I have to be honest. He doesn't seem like a dogmatic leftist. He's certainly a businessman. The fact that this guy managed to stay in control of his company through all that stuff means that he's got a capitalist's killer instinct for sure. He understands how to fight boardroom stuff. And I think that there's a worry among the Democrats that they won't have this secret weapon anymore of social media platforms that effectively do their bidding intentionally or unintentionally. And that's where you had AOC, who doesn't really understand the First Amendment, definitely doesn't understand the Second Amendment, but doesn't really understand the First Amendment, trying to score some points here against Mark Zuckerberg. We have a few moments. Here we go. On demonstrably false political ads, here's what AOC said to Mr. Zuckerberg. Play 19, please.
Do you see a potential problem here with a complete lack of fact-checking on political advertisements?
Well, Congresswoman, I think lying is bad, and I think if you were to run an ad that had a lie, that would be bad. That's different from it being, in our position, the right thing to do to prevent your constituents or people in an election from seeing that you had lied.
So you won't take down lies, or you will take down lies? I think this is just a pretty simple yes or no.
Congresswoman,
I'm not talking about spin. I'm talking about actual
yes, in most cases, in a democracy, okay. I believe that people should be able to see for themselves what politicians that they may or may not vote for
so
are
you
saying,
won't take them
judge their
down.
Character for themselves.
So you won't take. You may flag that it's wrong, but you won't take it down.
Congresswoman, it depends on the context that it shows up. Organic post ads, the treatment is a little.
See, AOC and the left don't understand the nuances here. Don't understand the competing values. All they want is that they can have an expectation to bully Facebook, as well as other social media, bully Twitter, bully Google, although Google's pretty left-wing, but bully any of them into doing their bidding when it comes to the suppression of speech. She's really asking Mark Zuckerberg, if Trump says that if he runs an ad that he's, the greatest president of all time, I mean, that's not true. Can't we get that taken down? She might say, oh, but no, that's fine. That's an opinion. All right. What's a fact versus an opinion to Democrats? They run around calling the investigation of Russia collusion origins a conspiracy theory all day. So does that mean that anything about the Russia collusion origins, any opinion that somebody raises on that should be discounted? See, Democrats have abandoned free speech. They want control of speech. Cancel culture and social justice, these concepts, which have risen to be much more important to them and much more potent than what should be a universal and shared value for all Americans, which is the right of free expression and not just a free press, but freedom of speech, free ideas, the free exchange thereof. That is now secondary to the ability to control the conversation and decide what is acceptable to be aired in public, what is acceptable for people to find out about. She's pushing him on fact-checking. Here's a fact that I want checked. I'm a Republican politician, let's say, and I want to run an ad on Facebook that says there are only 2 genders. Is that false? Does that get taken down? Is that a lie? There's a lot of political implications of that, by the way. There are 2 genders, male and female. Am I a liar? Ask a Democrat that. Some of them will say yes. They'll say that's an untrue thing. That is propaganda. Maybe it's even hateful. It could even be hate speech. There are 2 genders. What does Facebook do with that? That's all I wanted to say. A big, like a bumper sticker that pops up on your Facebook feed. There are 2 genders. What would they do? What would AOC want done in that situation? Is that a spin issue or is that a fact issue? When they're demanding that politicians, that campaign ads, which are very important going into election cycle, Facebook ads, this is how you really get your message to people. I mean, I live in a very blue state here. I barely ever see political ads. They don't spend any money trying to win over the presidential vote here in New York City. But Facebook stuff you'll see. Facebook stuff you can see anywhere across the country. And if you're telling me that I have to make a choice between a very successful Facebook campaign for my political candidate or running a bunch of TV ads, I think I'd probably do Facebook. I think it's better. It's more likely to have the intended. People would argue about this, but I think it's more likely to have the intended outcome. They want control of this. Democrats are concerned that they no longer have the comfort of the expectation that Facebook and YouTube and these other companies will do what they want them to do officially and unofficially and suppress conservative points of view. Remember, fake news, which Donald Trump turned on the media, was initially a charge that was made about people supporting Trump spreading lies on the internet. They were the ones. The initial accusation of fake news was made by the media against the Trump campaign, really, or against people that support Donald Trump. And then he turned it around on them as a way of saying, okay, well, sometimes people say things about me or that would support me that aren't true, but you, the New York Times, and you, the Washington Post, also publish stories that are fake, publish stories that are not true. So what are we to make of that? Fake news. And then why do you think it upsets them so much? Because he took what they threw at him and he threw it back at them and it hit them even more. How could you even begin to do this, though? To have fact checkers regular. PolitiFact, for example, is a joke. I mean, Snopes, I mean, these different fact checking sites are preposterously biased. But this is the same version or the same basic circumstance that plays out with the left. They say, the science supports us. And then you say, well, actually, no, the science, but they like to pretend, but science supports us, except in these places where it doesn't. Oh, the fact checkers support us. Well, that's because the fact checkers are a bunch of liberal journalists posing as fact checkers. Isn't that surprising? It's not surprising to anybody. But I have to say, Zuckerberg did a pretty good job up there on Capitol Hill. He's leaning into this a little bit. If he had some charisma, he might actually run for office one day.
Can you explain why you've named the Daily Caller, a publication well-documented with ties to white supremacists, as an official fact checker for Facebook?
Congresswoman, sure. We actually don't appoint the independent fact checkers. They go through an independent organization called the Independent Fact Checking Network that has a rigorous standard for who they allow to serve as a fact checker.
So you would say that white supremacist tied publications meet a rigorous standard for fact-checking? Thank you.
Congresswoman, I would say that we're not the one assessing that standard. The International Fact-Checking Network is the one who is setting that standard.
Wow. Ocasio-Cortez calling the Daily Caller a white supremacist-tied news site. I know many people at the Caller. It is a place that is perhaps best known, or one of the reasons best known, is Tucker Carlson was for many years the editor-in-chief. I don't think he still is. He might still be, technically. White supremacist-tied Daily Caller. I mean, for someone to be talking about facts and truth and then to call the Daily Caller a white supremacist-tied news site, based on what exactly? I mean, my friend Sagar Enjeti, who is of Indian heritage, who worked at the Daily Caller for years and then took over for me at Hill TV, was tweeting about this today. She's like, "What is she even talking about? What is this? To call a publication like that white supremacist? I mean, this would be like saying, yeah, the Huffington Post, a publication that's favorable to Islamic terrorists. I'm just going to say it. I don't have any basis for it, really. I mean, I disagree with their take on radical Islam, and I can make a case, but at some point, we've got to stay within some realm of reality, right? At some point, you've got to have some backup for these kinds of allegations. And it's just a perfect example of why you could never trust the left in a regime of censorship to do anything other than suppress ideas they don't like, not adhere to any generally applicable principles, and just do everything that they can to make it effectively impossible for people to have a contrary point of view. That's the country they want to live in. AOC, the Democrat, socialist left, wants an America where there's only one acceptable point of view on any important issue, and other points of view are to be actively suppressed and punished and eradicated. That's very clear. They do not believe in the free exchange of ideas. They do not believe that people could have controversial opinions about things, which I would also note, one of the great advantages that we have had over other cultures and civilizations in the world, places like China, where there's a tremendous amount of ideological conformity, is that you have people that will break the mold here, whether it's in science or in politics or any number of things. It's, in fact, the person that takes the unpopular idea and then wins people over to his or her side that often moves the needle more than anybody else. But collectivists hate that. Let's talk about a 5-hour workday. No, I mean, really, let's actually talk about a 5-hour workday for a second. Sounds like a great idea to me, I've got to tell you. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Well, it turns out that some people have began to try this out. They're willing to see if the basic theory here would be correct. And more or less, here's how it goes. A tremendous amount of office culture, which I say with a degree of, gives me a shudder, because I've spent way too much time, especially at the CIA. Office culture was just a big part of it, man. You're just in those cubicle farms, just walking around, drinking coffee, making copies, all that stuff. And you realize that time in the office has been taken, in our minds, this has been made to equate with productivity and being a worthwhile employee. And we've all gotten used to this idea of an 8-hour workday. Well, the 8-hour workday really comes from the period of the Industrial Revolution, where hours in the assembly line, or hours in the factory, did directly, because there was no way to go beyond whatever it was that you were doing hour by hour, really. Now, the factory could become more efficient, but you as a cog in that machine were just doing the longer you were there, the more output there would be. And that has become, I think, a standard throughout really the whole world. This idea of an 8-hour workday, and a lot of people I know are listening to me and they're saying, Buck, I wish I could work 8 hours. I work 10 hours a day, or I got overtime every day. And it's, it's crazy. And I'm producer Mark. This guy sometimes comes in here. I'm like, how many overnight shifts can you work, like 4 or 5 days before you just show up like a little puddle?
I'm
Just
working
melting
80
the
hours
floor.
this week.
You're working 80 hours this week.
Yeah.
You and the wife going to Tahiti or something for the
Jamaica.
Okay. Very nice.
Yes.
Good,
Not
good.
quite Tahiti, but
Yeah,
very
yeah.
nice.
Still got to pay for it. I get you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So 80 hours this guy's working over here. Now, he has to be here for the hours of the shows that are on the air. So there are cases where there's a necessity of time spent on these enterprises that it doesn't, you have to be there, right? I do a 3-hour radio show every day. I got to be able to put out those 3 hours of radio every day. There's no way for me to do a 30-minute show and cover 3 hours, right? So there's some, okay, put that aside for a moment, though. The general thesis that we all operate under is more hours, 8 hours is what is the standard. It's the standard. And that the more hours you spend in the office, the more productive you're going to be. Well, it turns out there are some companies now that are testing this in Bielefeld, Germany, for example. Yeah. So, like, why don't we have more time to go to the sculpture gardens and drink some Hefeweizen, perhaps, and, I don't know, go dancing, go listen to some techno music. If I'm working 8 to 10 hours a day, it's very difficult. I get very tired. Yeah. So they're trying this out in Bielefeld, Germany. Lasse Reingans, Guten Tag, has realized, according to the Wall Street Journal, that taking time to check Facebook or respond to reply all emails distracted him from work goals and caused him to spend extra hours at the office rather than with his young daughters. So when he acquired a small tech consulting firm in late 2017, he introduced a radical idea. Reduce the workday to 5 hours from the standard 8 while leaving worker salaries and vacation time at the same level. They were not sure if I was kidding, he says. Some of them thought I was testing them, but I was being serious. Employees, they ran this whole test. He says that employees can, in fact, deliver the same output during a focused 25-hour work week as in 40 hours interrupted with distractions. I think this is the way things should go in the future. I'm just going to say it. I think this is what should happen. I got a whole bunch of Buck's radical ideas. Here's one. Let's stop waking up kids, especially in adolescence, at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, jamming them into a classroom at 8 a.m. and making them sit in that classroom or a series of classrooms until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day. This is nuts. I was exhausted for most of high school. You play sports after school. You do a couple of hours. You go to you're playing a basketball game or something. Or you go play in a football game, and you end up exhausted. And you're put in. And look, let's be honest. I think the reason that kids go to school so early is because parents want to drop the kids off on their way to work, and so the parent schedule drives what we're doing with kids. But it's not necessarily best for the kids. Kids need more sleep. I'm just going to say it. I would have been a better, more productive student in high school if I could have slept till 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. That would have been great. And keep them later if you need to. Anyway, I got a whole bunch of radical ideas. I got a lot of things I got to put out there that I want changed. And there's that book, The 5-Hour Work Week. Now, that's really radical. This is the 5-hour work day. But for those of you that, like me, have been cubicle creatures, which I did it. I put in my years. I put in my years in the cubes, man. Oh, I fought with fax machines and printers. Printers were the bane of my existence. Oh, Buck, why don't you do this and collate it, and then you're going to scan it, and then you're going to put it in the PDF and the blah. I was like, what? I had to figure this stuff out all the time. That's why that scene in Office Space where they take the printer out and they beat it with baseball bats was so, so sweet. But I've spent way too many hours in offices, and I can tell you that I'd say, and bringing back to Office Space, remember when he says, the main character says, I think in any given week, I do an actual, about 40 minutes a day, I think he says, of real, actual, or maybe it's 40 minutes a week, real, actual work. And anyone who spends time in an office will tell you this is true. Anybody who spends time, in the office will let you know that that if they were told, here are your tasks, here's the output that needs to be done, and if you got it done by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you could leave. Would they be able to eliminate distractions and have a more concerted effort over that period so that the company gets the same benefits, but they have a shorter workday? And also, does the company then have a happier and even more productive and more creative employee on their hands? And I think the answer is yes. Think about all the distractions of social media, personal email, phone calls, walking around talking to producer Mark about whether baseball or hockey is more boring. I mean, these are the things that can really divert you from the work that you have to do. See, he's working right now, so I'm poking at him when he actually has things he has to do.
I heard you, and it's noted.
Yeah, okay. He can get back at me later. Point here being that there's all this stuff that distracts us all, but we're like 8 hours, and sometimes 9 hours. Then you get into law where they have all the billable hour stuff, so that they just want to spend as many hours. The incentive of our whole corporate law structure is to extend out and spend as much time doing your tasks as possible to bill you as much as possible, instead of making the whole process shorter and more efficient for everyone, so that it would be based more on outcome. You could have more of a retainer schedule. You pay somebody to work on the project, the idea being that, from start to finish, it'll cost X, and just do the bids that way. No, what they do is they get a senior associate, gives it to the junior associate, blah, 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 blah. It's just all meant to suck as much money from you as possible. That's what the corporate legal system is doing. Right now, every lawyer listening across America is like, yep, it's totally true. And all of them know that they're being told more billable hours. All right. What if we could start to develop an office culture? Remember, these things are new inventions in human history. The idea of an 8-hour workday, a 40-hour work week, weekends. These are new phenomenon in the history. I mean, relatively speaking, this stuff's only been around for 50 years, depending on what exactly we're talking about. There was a work week before. Yeah, maybe people had Sundays off, day of the Lord's rest in America at certain points in our history. But other than that, it's like you open the store if you wanted to do business. You close the store if there's no business. I mean, this is the way things work. You're running a farm, you got to make sure you plant the crops and you get the food. There's actually a fascinating guy on this particular topic. His name is Naval Ravikant. And I have very rarely listened to a podcast, someone else's podcast, not that I listen to my own podcast more than once, but someone else's podcast more than once. I listened to Joe Rogan and Naval Ravikant. Maybe this was they first sat down together. And Naval is a very sharp guy, very smart guy. And Joe Rogan's a fantastic interviewer. And it's just interesting because he approaches things from the perspective of interesting guy who's curious, though, and knows what he doesn't know and wants to get answers so that everybody learns more who's listening, which is a great approach for any media endeavor. And it's why his podcast is so huge. But I was listening to this Naval exchange with him, and Naval has a whole theory. And he started AngelList. He's a Silicon Valley guy who's rational and reasonable. He's not a leftist. He's not a conservative. He just approaches things on an individual issue basis and tries to find out what's true and what works and what doesn't. He says that all of this stuff of corporate culture, I mean, really comes out of the Industrial Revolution. He says if you go even before agriculture, that was the first time that you had people working in cooperatives or in a collective sense. If you go pre-industrialized or pre-collectivized agriculture, human beings worked in bands that were effectively family and then tribe and then maybe, city state, maybe larger village or something. But there were these concentric circles. And the way that work was done was you worked when you had to work and then you rested and you didn't. You worked very hard for a little bit and then you weren't working at all. And there wasn't this sense of constantly going through a set schedule of you just have to work because you have to work because that's what you've been told. He calls it work like a lion. I saw this recently where, a lion, if you ever see them, those of you like me, I used to spend way too much time nature, history shows. There he plane, stalking his prey, all that stuff. You're like, ooh, you're going to catch the gazelle this time? Or the antelope or whatever. And I actually, somebody who used to root for the big cats, I just think they're really cool. But he says that a lion, most of the day you see them, they're hanging out. They're kind of lying. They're lying, pardon me, bad pun, but they're lying around. They're just conserving energy, staying out of the heat. But then they get hungry and it's like, all right, let's go and tackle a gazelle and, eat it. And then they have a tremendous expenditure of energy and they hone their skills through that process. Anyway, he says that human beings should start to think of approaching work more like that. And that the internet, because of the infinite leverage that it has, allows this. Sure, you may not have been able to get the work that you want, especially any kind of virtual work or creative information economy-based work, if you could only rely on what was immediately available in your town. But now because of the internet, I paid in Tel Aviv to do work for me recently. I've outsourced. I've had people work on designs for this or logos for that, or send me a proposal for this all over the world. And that is going to be eventually the direction that a lot of careers, a lot of work starts to go in, because you're really not necessarily, going back to this 5-hour workday, you're not necessarily more productive. You're certainly not necessarily happier by spending more hours in the office. There's only so much real intellectual energy that you have on any given day. I mean, even doing this show, I do a 3-hour radio show every day. My 3-hour show is about the max of what I think I can do at a certain level. If I did an 8-hour radio show every day, I could probably do it. And if, Team Buck wants to make it rain dollar bills up in here, I could probably do that for you guys if the numbers were right. But it would be brutal. And by the 4th hour, by the 5th hour, I've actually done 6 hours of radio in one day. So I've gone through this before. Your voice starts to give out a little bit. Yeah, the Republicans and the Democrats, you start to just, your brain just turns to mush after a while. I think about all these people I know who work in investment banking and corporate law, these different professions, and so much of their value is considered how long do you spend in the office, much more than how good are you at this thing, how efficient are you at completing this task. And that's a redesign of our whole approach to working in corporate environments. I think that we're going to see more efforts at this, because work-life balance, especially, and now I sound like one of these consultants that talks about this, but work-life balance for millennials, for the younger generations, people don't want to work for the same company for 40 years and retire. They don't want to do that. They want to go through phases. By the way, Naval Ravikant, going back to this conversation, he says that he think of the way that in some of the earliest iterations of career in Western civilization, like in ancient Rome, you were a student, and then you were a soldier, and then you were a farmer, and then you were perhaps a merchant, and then you were a statesman, and there were different life phases, and it wasn't all just you do one thing. Or that's a new phenomenon, not one that we necessarily have to all just agree to and replicate. So 5-hour workdays, would that be cool? I think it would. Is it worth a shot at more places to see if they can get the work done with fewer distractions and greater expectations of output? Yeah, I do. Because spending our lives in cubes just because that's what we're told to do doesn't seem like a good idea to me. And if we could all get out of that mentality, be living much healthier, happier corporate lives. I really do. Just want to say I hope you all are enjoying the new Pluto stream that we do here of the show. If you haven't checked it out yet, channel 248 on Pluto TV. The app is totally free. We're running my show and Jesse Kelly's show on The First, which is the name of the channel, channel 248. And so far, feedback's been very positive. Any thoughts you have, by the way, please do share. You can send us your requests or recommendations for Pluto TV on Facebook.com/Buck Sexton or Team Buck at iHeartMedia.com. And then, of course, the podcast. As you know, we are sharing this podcast every day by about 3 Eastern, sometimes a little earlier, which means that I want for all of you listening this to be your daily download. And if you know anybody who listens to podcasts, please do pass along to them They need to check out the Buck Sexton Show. The best thing they can do is subscribe on iTunes or the iHeart app. It's a really easy thing to do. Next time you're talking to anyone in your life who listens to podcasts, be like, yo, have you checked out the Buck Sexton Show? Tell them to give it a listen. Totally free. All about freedom.